So should be up now. I think there's like 7 people watching, which is pretty good for live on my channel, to be fair.
Oh,
like 2 or 3 live.
Awesome. Well, I put it in my Discord server and I tweeted it out.
Okay.
And I shared it on the Paulogia video that I just left.
Right. Okay. What was the video about?
The video. Oh, I'm gonna mute this. Sorry. Gosh, I didn't have it on mute. Amateur hour. Sorry. A bunch of different topics. It was a tour of Ken Ham's Creation Museum. Paul went there a few years ago. It was like back in 2017, I think, that he went there, and they just did like a complete revamp of it. So we just did a comparison. And also they were talking about the Mormon Church. I don't know. Are you familiar with the channel Mr. Atheist?
No, I'm not. No.
Oh, okay. So he had Mr. Atheist on. Mr. Atheist covers a lot of stuff about the Mormon Church and LGBT rights and stuff like that. So he had Mr. Atheist on, and I was on at the end of the video. Yeah. Anyway, it was. I'm really sorry. I'm all over the place today. Oh, we're live now too. So hi everyone. How you doing?
Yeah. Don't worry. It's so good. all 3 people. Great.
Hi, all people.
Critical Cripple says you're a... I don't know who. Anyway, so I wondered, like, what's your kind of backstory and journey then to, like, how did you go from wherever you were to being like an atheist YouTuber, kind of online public figure? What's your kind of story behind that journey?
Oh, that's I don't know how interesting it is actually, but it's kind of a long story.
Right.
So wow, where to start with this story? The deconversion happened a relatively substantial amount of time, or the journey towards deconversion.
You were like, what kind of sect of Christianity? Or
I was an Anglican.
Okay, right, interesting.
In very, very devout Anglican. I was an altar girl. I was the first altar girl in my church. I was the youngest human to be confirmed in the church. I was confirmed at 8. And it's usually not something that you go through until you hit junior high. But when I was in grade 4, I was ready. I was I was ready to go. I was ready to do it. So, yeah. So I went to, all my confirmation classes, and I got confirmed at 8 so that I could be an altar girl. And yeah, so I was very, very devout, but I came from a family where my father left when I was born.
Okay.
So my mother didn't really go to church much because she was kind of, I guess, looked down upon. But my grandmother was incredibly devout. And she was the matriarch of our family and is, by every estimation, one of the best humans that I've ever encountered in my whole entire life. And she was a very, very, very devout Christian up until her last days.
Right.
So that's where I came from. That's my religious affiliation, my background. But when I was in my 20s, I went through some things in my life that were not optimal. And I turned to my faith at that point in time for guidance and reason. And I was looking very much into things that had to do with morality and how best to proceed when, bad things happen, turn the other cheek, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I found a lot of what I read lacking. Like I couldn't reconcile my understanding of morality with what I was reading.
Okay. Sure.
And nobody could really answer the questions that I had. And that started to put chinks in the armor. And I would have at that point in time told you I was probably an agnostic. I would have said, I still believe in something spiritual, but I'm not sure that I follow any particular denomination. And then later in life, pardon me, sorry.
Yes, right.
I started doing a bit more research just to kind of make sure that I had solid footing on where I was standing. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized that nobody had answers to my questions. And a lot of the answers that people tried to give to my questions were either dismissive of my concerns as though they weren't concerns, or they didn't address them or obfuscated them or misrepresented them. So I started to look at myself, and there just weren't answers to a lot of the questions I have. So that's the Cole's Notes version.
Okay.
I guess.
And how kind of recently was it then that you say you kind of went through deconversion? Was that?
It was in my mid to late 20s that I probably would have said I'm an agnostic.
Right.
I didn't own the label of atheist until I was in my early to mid 30s.
Okay. And was there something particular that made you kind of shift from, I suppose, like an agnostic position of uncertainty to like or would you even define atheism as like there is no God, a positive claim, or would it, what was kind of that transition there?
That's an interesting question. Okay, so there's a massive amount of debate around the definition of atheism. I'm sure you're aware of that. And that debate kind of frustrates me, because what's interesting is I'm not sure that my overall position switched that much. So much as my realization that I shouldn't be afraid to call myself an atheist. I think that there was a lot of social stigmatization. Like there was a lot of fear tied to that label with me that I think held me off of actually holding it. And that kind of ties into my journey towards YouTube, because I found a lot of the people that were, representative of atheists kind of helped perpetuate that stigma that stopped me from adopting the label that I really should have had to begin with, because that's what I was. And I wanted somebody more representative of me and how I conduct myself to be out in the open and in participating in these things.
What does it mean to you then? Is atheism like the positive assertion, or is it like an absence of belief? Or
to me, it would, for me personally, and I can only speak for myself, I would say that I would make the positive assertion that I don't think that there is a God. Like that doesn't mean that I'm not open to anything that might be able to change my mind. I'm not saying that there's no absolute in that statement. I'm not saying, I can definitively prove that there is no God. I'm saying that based on my understanding, I'm willing to say that I don't think there is.
Right. As in that's like a kind of default position almost for the amount of evidence that we have or something. Would that be?
Some people think that. I was in the babies are atheists argument recently.
Yeah.
And I fell actually on the opposite side of that spectrum, because I think that you need cognition in order to assess a claim, like whether or not a God exists. I don't think that you can come to a conclusion on a proposition like that without the ability to come to a conclusion on the proposition like that. But I do understand that some people see it as the default position because they believe that a belief in a God you have to be aware of the proposition in order to have a position on it. So I can see both sides of that. I don't know. What do you think about that? Like when it comes to questions about what is atheism, like, do you see personally, like, I won't get offended because I'm not easily offended, but what do you think?
Sorry, you cut out for like a second then when you asked that question.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I was asking what you think. What do you personally think about that when it comes to the proposition, like when it comes to atheists and how atheists define themselves?
So I'm actually sorry.
No, go ahead. You're good.
I'm happy for people to actually define it in the way that they think kind of represents them. But for me, I do think I'd say like agnosticism would either be a position of ignorance, maybe, or apathy, or maybe an informed position that says there's no kind of actual justification for the claim that there is or isn't a God. I'd say that that's kind of broadly agnosticism for me. Atheism tends to like I see that as the positive assertion that there is no God, or no good reasons, and so we should say that there's not. But I can see there's kind of like an overlap in between those two categories, and then obviously, you know, you've got your kind of theistic and various pantheistic, whatever. Yeah, I understand the debate, but I find it kind of like you know, like, I
think it's fruitless.
Yeah, it's
trivial,
so pointless and trivial. Yeah, exactly.
But I think one of the reasons that people think that or well, see it as it could be important, depending on your perspective, is it shifts burden of proof around.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So, and that's important to people in dialogues, whether or not you have to prove what you're saying or I have to prove what I'm saying.
Right.
It's very important as a baseline when you're entering in a conversation. And some people see atheists as skirting that burden of proof by saying, I'm lack theist, right? I lack belief. Sure. You have to prove your God exists. I don't have to prove anything.
It's like the debate with William Lane Craig and Peter Hitchens. There's like a bit where he goes, "You mean theist?" And yeah, yeah, it's more like a rhetorical device, I think, for a lot of people, and I think that's why it even frustrates me sometimes when I see it become this contentious point in discussions between Christians and atheists, because it's like it's just this pointless definitional thing. I mean, I probably only go with the definition I've got because when I was like in high school, that's what my religious studies teacher kind of like taught me that it meant. It's probably not even like some well thought through thing. It's just that's what got me marks on an exam.
Well, labels have as much use as they are to describe your position, right? In the context of a conversation. I made an entire video about this. It's called Always Check the Label, and it's ancient. Like I made it ages ago when I first started my channel, because I was so frustrated with this, because the way I look at it, however you're using a label, like if I need clarification on it, I'll just say, okay, what does that mean to you? And then once I find out what that means to you, then we can proceed from there and go on to the crux of the conversation, like the meat of the conversation, the better part of the conversation that matters and is relevant. If we spend hours and hours going round and round and round about how do you define yourself, then we never get to some of the important points of why you define yourself that way. And those are the things that
and it is just like a power play a lot of the time as well.
Oh, for sure.
So yeah. In terms of what you were saying about kind of like claiming that definition of atheist, that like I think I get where you're coming from, because within the religious context there is like a social peer pressure dynamic kind of thing going on, and even like us versus them kind of groupthink psychology, which can play a role. And so I can see how maybe elements of fear around like stigma, that's like a them term, it would be atheist, is it? But I'm wondering, you kind of said, was it that you wanted to overcome the feeling of like religious oppression that you wanted to take that term, or what was the choice really? Because it seemed maybe, I don't know what the right word is to use, like you said, not based on argumentation, but just based on like an emotional thing, maybe, that you wanted to choose the term atheist.
Okay, that's an interesting question that I haven't been asked before, and it's a good question. I feel as though I came to my position through rational introspective sort of arguments with myself, right? Like I had rationalizations for holding my position, but I wouldn't own that position.
Right.
And I think those are two segregated things, how you got to a position and what you label that position. Now, I felt, and this is where the feelings come in, that if I told people I was an atheist, that would come with a certain set of stigmatization. And some of that stigmatization was a result of just the way society is constructed in its perception of atheists, which is changing, which is wonderful. And some of that was a result of, I guess, other people giving less than optimal public perspective of what it means to be an atheist by how they conduct themselves in the public discourse. And that's not true for everybody, but it was true for some prominent atheists around the time that I was going through sort of deconversion stage where I was ready to own that label. So that's one of the reasons that I entered it. Does that help to answer the question of how I like segregated the two, or do you feel as though I skirted? I just want to make sure that I'm addressing things directly for you.
Yeah, no, I think you are. I guess it's just then, but maybe it's for me. I do feel like it's not that I want to force it on you, but I feel like maybe atheism seems like it's a position, especially if you're coming from like a default of Christianity to go to atheism, maybe there'd be like a logical argumentation reason or something. Was there like a really powerful defeater to the belief or something that led you away? Or
a couple. Several, as a matter of fact.
I'm not saying you'd have no reasons, but I was just wondering, is there like one specific or one that made you really kind of think, oh, hang on, what is this that I kind of believe? Or
the reasons that I didn't think there were a God anymore, and the reasons I was or wasn't willing to hold the label are different. Okay. Now, what's more interesting is probably the reasons why I deconverted, as opposed to why I decided ultimately, oh, okay, yeah, I am an atheist and I should own it.
Right, sure.
And so I'm happy to have conversations about that. That's what's probably more interesting to everybody, really, to be honest, because, who cares why I decided I was an atheist, why I decided to hold the label. Like, why did I decide
I find it kind of interesting. I think it's interesting because a lot of the dialogue online can be just the argumentation based, but it's also interesting because we are emotional creatures, and that does certainly drive us as well to find out.
We sure are.
So in terms of like arguments and stuff, then what was it that really made you doubt? Really made you think? These questions that couldn't be answered in church and stuff. What were they generally kind of to do with the Bible text, or like philosophical in nature, or?
They ran the gamut, actually, scientifically, biblically, philosophically. Like, they ran the gamut, and it's going to be difficult for me to accurately and succinctly describe to you what several years of my life of questioning look like. But I can give you a couple of things that were linchpins for me. One of the things that was a linchpin for me is I was the type of Christian who always believed in evolution. Like, I was never a young earth creationist. Like, I never had that as a doubt. It never even occurred to me that I needed to doubt it. But going through the Bible start to finish, which is something that I did at the age of like 24 or 25 for like the first time. Right. Like, actually reading it start to finish. I'd read it piecemeal as it was dictated to me. Like, read this passage, it'll be beneficial to you. Or we're going to study this passage today. You don't really, most Christians, maybe you're different, don't start at the beginning and read all the way to the end, just themselves independently.
I actually started doing it a few months ago. And I do have to admit, though, I have to admit, like when you get to, especially around Exodus and stuff, and you're reading about, like burning the fat and it's like it's really difficult to get through, like genuinely, because
begat.
Well, not just that. I mean, even the visceral kind of brutal and barbaric seeming language that's being used to describe this stuff that's going on, and it doesn't seem to make much sense. And it's like, you can try and you can read it back through your systematic theology, but it's so bizarre and weird and alien to where I'm at as like a 21st century human as well. Right. That it's like that I don't, you don't even want to engage with it, and then it's like boring as well, and it's
dry.
Really yeah.
So I wonder if you find it as difficult to me. So I can give you a couple of samples. Like, one of the things that I bring up often is, this is the point in my life that I remember actually throwing the book because I was so frustrated. I got to Numbers, and I feel like it might be it's either 21 or 31, and I can't remember. And it's the test for the unfaithful wife.
Okay, yeah. With the
that
water potion thing
was incredibly difficult to reconcile for me. And here's the thing that you have to keep in mind. I was like, I wanted to reconcile it. I came from a position of this needs to make sense. I need to make it make sense. And I couldn't. Right. I just couldn't. I could not reconcile. Are you familiar with that passage, the test for the unfaithful wife?
Yeah, I am. Yeah. So I actually first came across it from, there was a TV show, where, what was it called? Called like Kingdom something. It was about like Vikings and stuff in England, and like Christianity being the predominant kind of thing. There was a particular scene where there was a woman and the husband thought he cheated on her. And the priest goes, there is one thing from the Bible we can try, or whatever. And I was like that's not like Christianity. That's not like, and then
it totally
I was like, yeah, I was like, this is something that's there in the Old Testament. You know, it's like, you know, my local vicar isn't going to be doing this anytime soon, but it is
Yeah,
there.
but how do you get past that? Like that's what I found hard is
Sure,
how do you get past that? I had to accept that as part of my faith because I needed to accept it as true. I needed to find a context where it would be okay to force a woman to drink dirt water to find out whether or not she'd been unfaithful by forcing an abortion on her and making her sterile forever. I had to find a way to make that okay. And no matter what way I looked at it, no matter what scenario I planted it in, I couldn't. Yeah. I just couldn't.
And it gets, I think it's even, I completely agree with you, like reading through a lot of those passages in the Old Testament where, you know, like people do things wrong and they're just kind of swallowed up by the ground or whatever. Stuff like that is genuinely
even that stuff you can really kind of write them off as bad. That's how I did it. I was just like, well, those were bad people, so God did that to the bad people. But in this instance, like if I was holding true to my Christianity, then that life inside that woman was innocent and not privy to her sins. Like even if she was unfaithful, every scenario I ran through, I just couldn't do it. And if this was supposed to be my source for morality, why couldn't I reconcile my conceptualization of morality with that? How could I, like, how do you do it? Like, you've read it, you understand it. How do you do it?
I'd say for me, it's a question I wrestle with, but I think I view the whole thing in a very different way to how a lot of Christians would, and in a way that might make a lot fit. So I kind of, from the conservative evangelical angle, or a very particular view of what scripture is, what it means, what Christianity is. There is a need. So like we can jump straight to, and this isn't where I want to come from. I find this insufficient, but you could, well, the Molinist view of God, he knew what people would freely choose given the choice. So he's actually basing it on people's moral actions by God's knowledge of subjunctive conditionals and what would have been the case. And it's like, so he's justified it. And it's like, that's just not that, this obscure, logical, philosophical.
It's mental gymnastics and whataboutism to me. That's what that seems like to me. Yeah.
And then there are a lot of the other forms of apologetics for the Old Testament I've not found satisfying either. I mean, I think for me, partly it's thinking about how far removed that culture and time is, but also how much of the authors comes across in scripture as well. So I don't think I take this view of inspiration like scriptures as some kind of magical thing. And I actually see it working as this narrative which is ultimately revealed in the Gospels, but even they're pretty like shoddy and heavily influenced by the authors in terms of, terms of a lot of stuff. But we have this ultimate revelation, I think, of God's character in Christ, and that's what it seems to be about. And then for me, and again, I think conservative evangelicals, you hear this sort of thing, it's like it's about then looking at who Christ was and trying to live that out in the world and live it within the community of people who are alive and things. And
why does it always go to the New Testament when you have to reconcile the Old Testament? It's like it always seems to come to, well, you can kind of ignore this because it's based on context, whether or not God did or did not intervene, and whether or not you have to consider God the ultimate source for morality. Apparently, God has to act contextually when he acts, based on the culture at the time. And then later, when the context is different, he gives us a better example, but he couldn't provide a better example prior. I mean, he's God. Like, these are the things that I go through in my head. These are why. And I have more. This is just one. Like, that it's hard, like, to go through all of that to reconcile just one passage over and over
I agree.
again.
I agree that that's a really terrible passage. I think the reason why it's kind of like, it's not to skirt around the fact that that's really difficult and horrible, but it's kind of like then if we're going to just discard the whole thing, we're potentially throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So it's like,
what does it mean when you say discard the whole thing? Do you mean the concept of God or the efficacy of the Bible?
Yeah, maybe the concept of God, Christianity. Yeah. Well, it depends what we mean again by the kind of efficacy of the Bible, because what's it really trying to communicate? Is it a rule book of propositions Well, certainly it seems to be the case in those in the Pentateuch, but is that what the overarching thing is now as we have it in the? So I guess what I mean by throw the whole thing out is like we can see in that narrative of Christ and that narrative of self-sacrifice that we've got something good, something that's kind of underpinned Western civilization and many interesting moral progress developments and things through that. And it's like, can we work back from that point to maybe try and understand what's going on in the Old Testament?
Isn't that kind of like a post hoc rationalization for why it should be retained why portions of it should be retained, because you fear the throwing the baby out with the bathwater component?
It could be, but I think
why is that an argument for how it's true?
Okay. I don't know that it's an argument for how it's true, but it's an argument for maybe trying to make sense of these difficult ethical things. So it's like we've got all these things, and the overarching narrative seems to be leading up to Christ. Like it all fits together in that sense. So there's something going on. It's linked in some way through history. And if our view of how God's working is through history relating to different cultures, then we take that into account. No, it doesn't necessarily mean even, that this thing is historically reliable. Some people will say, well, look at Jesus's view of the Old Testament as reported in the Gospels. That means we've got to have this particular view of the Old Testament. I don't know if that's the case. And that's why maybe I'm more kind of fluid in my thinking about these things, because I feel like what faith means to me is essentially a trust in God. And sometimes it seems like that can actually go against reason. And that sounds really scary, because that's like, well, is that, even for me, I'm like, is that the same? Is
that reasonable?
Yeah. Is that reasonable? Is that someone going to fly into, but I think in general,
and why are you trying to reconcile it? That's an interesting question too. And I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I find this stuff fascinating. Like a lot of the times when I have these dialogues, like I mentioned the baby out with the bathwater thing. A lot of people are essentially saying like, this means something to me and it's valuable. I don't want to discard something that's valuable. Like I have a personal.
You broke up a little bit, Shan. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? Is that any better? Oh, did I lose you or did you lose me? Can you hear me?
I think you broke up a little bit.
I'm so sorry.
I think the bit right broke. No, it's all right. Don't worry. It's saying the stream health is good, so that's all that matters.
Oh, well, there you go. That's good. All right, so I'll start again, and I'm so
sure.
sorry. I hope it's not my end. So a lot of the time when I have these conversations, I find it really, really fascinating because I see bits of myself previously, and I can speak for myself, and it meant something to me and I wanted to retain it. So I continuously found ways to make those attempts. And by finding ways to make those attempts, I actually, I don't want to say undermined myself, but undermined the way that I tend to look at everything else with the exception of this. I couldn't take it holistically. I had to take it piecemeal, and I had to take those pieces and put them through a filter of interpretation in order to allow myself to reconcile it in its totality. And I had to discard portions. I had to essentially be a cafeteria Christian. I had to recognize the fact in myself. I had to be honest in myself and saying that I'm keeping the pieces that I like and find valuable, finding rationalizations to discard the pieces that aren't. And is that faith, or is that just something that I really, really want to be true?
Yeah.
And what's more valuable to me, being honest with myself about my assessments of what is or isn't true, or holding on to this regardless of my position on truth for everything else external to this. And that kind of brings me to like, when this is going to seem like a subject change, and I'm sorry, but it's natural in my head.
Yeah, don't worry.
Let me know if you want to draw back. But I studied psychology. And when I studied psychology, I studied neurology really, really heavily because I studied cognition. And like I mentioned, I already believed in evolution. So the concept of the soul started to kind of evaporate for me, because at what point did God impart humans with a soul? Like, was it when we were single-celled organisms? When was it when transferred from reptile to mammal? Was it when the first primate species existed? And how did he decide which lineage would keep a soul? Like, when did we become unique and created in his image? Like, when did he go, okay, now's the time, it's, you know, billions of years have passed, now I've decided they're human, now they get souls? Like, do you ever struggle with that?
I think so. I did for what, because so I was similarly to you, I've always been on board with evolution is pretty much the best explanation.
Are you Anglican too?
I am in the Church of England, yeah.
There you go. There you go. Cheers.
Like it was really genuinely never a problem until you know, so you speak to some people though, and then it's like this big issue, and you're like, hang on, what's going? And then I started thinking, I think because of the kind of some of the groupthink elements, I was like, well, maybe I am wrong. But then I looked into it a bit more, and I'm like, no, the evidence is still there from when you learn it the first time. Like, yeah, I think in terms of reconciling that with scripture, understanding. Are you familiar with any of like Michael Heiser's work on Genesis?
No, I'm afraid not.
Okay, so he argues from syntax that a better translation of the first, rather than in the beginning, is when the beginning. So, for example, if you look at the Hebrew kind of version of Genesis in, I'm going to forget which specific document it's called, but vowels were basically introduced into it in around the year 800 in the Hebrew language, and the version, and again I forgot the Hebrew words. It was a while ago I was looking at this. But it's essentially when with the vowels, and obviously that's 800 years later. But it's like that's their version would be that, and then he's also argues from it as an incomplete clause. So it's not in the beginning is like would be like a complete thing, whereas he's saying it's like when the beginning because it fits better with the way it is. And then a guy called John Walton, he's got a book called The Lost World of Genesis 1, where he's arguing for like a functional ontology. So rather than it being about material creation as we would think about it today, it's about God assigning proper function to things, and perhaps in the space of abstraction, or maybe a Platonic kind of world of forms type thing. Or I still don't understand exactly what it means, but in terms of function in relation to God, function in relation to man, and it seems to be that there's a pre-existing material creation, and then over that 7-day period when God inaugurates his temple, he baras man, he makes man in his own image. So there might be the existing matter that allows for evolution. Now I think
what about souls though? That's still like that explains, that reconciles maybe evolution.
Well, do you not think when he makes I think it's when he blesses man in his own image, when he that would be when.
So we set things forward and then waited billions of years, and then at one point in time decided this is when you are imbued with souls.
I think so. And yeah, I agree. I think if you phrase it like that, it can sound kind of arbitrary, but I don't
How
think
differently could I phrase it to be accurate?
Okay, not that I'm not saying you're being inaccurate, but I think just saying like he waited millions of years and then chose for no reason. I don't know what that reason is. No, but I don't know what that reason is or why.
But if you understand evolution, there wasn't any point that there wasn't one day that we were, lower order primates, and then the next day we woke up human. It's like, right. But that's not the way it works.
But if it is the case that there's a God who exists and that's a personal God that interacts with people, it's possible that one day he changed the essential ontology of human beings.
Just flicked a switch?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea how that happened.
Y'all got souls now.
Yeah, but that's basically all there is in the Bible to work off, really.
Right.
Yeah.
See, that's.
But I think Sorry.
Hard for me. It's hard for me.
I agree.
There's so many assumptions there. Like, we are making those assumptions. That's not contained in the text anywhere. There's nowhere stating that. Period. Full stop. These are all assumptions that need to be made and asserted based on absolutely nothing except speculation, and then just adopted.
Not everything. Sorry, not everything. I mean, a lot of that stuff that Michael Heiser and John Walton are arguing for is to do with bringing it out of the scripture, and they're arguing generally from like the Hebrew grammar and stuff. But I think maybe if you think about it from the converse as well, so so when I before I really explored Christianity seriously, or even and I was a naturalist and someone who was very, I excelled at science in school, and so for those reasons, that my identity was based in my ability to understand things. So I fell in maybe with that end of the atheist crowd that you're saying kind of didn't feel represented you. I think that was kind of what I was like in high school a bit more.
The rebellious atheist.
Yeah. So my
the antagonist.
My view of morality in people as a result of that was essentially that all we are is molecular machines. Now, I know that there are more complicated naturalist ethical theories. I know that now, but I'm saying at the time, that purely naturalist speculation on who I was, firstly, I didn't think I had any inherent value beyond my constituent matter. And I remember,
and I'm sorry you felt that way.
Well, but I also saw, I remember it was actually, what was it on? Electron, something to do with like the Krebs cycle or something. I can't remember exactly, but the lecturer said something to do with, well, when you look at another person, your DNA evaluates them, and you see whether you're like gonna, whether they're a suitable mate or not within seconds, and and that really impacted then. Like I remember being in school and stuff, and I was thinking, yeah, like all I am is a reproductive machine, and all these people around me, all of their actions and things, it's only centered around reproduction. It's only centered around resources, all these things that I think exist. So I remember, like, I'd walk in the park and I think that's a really beautiful view, and I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm sure that's just my 8-bit brain kind of tricking me, because this is like an advantageous place to escape from predators or something. Like everything became a just so story to do with my kind of naturalist worldview, and it was a really dark place, a really
being intelligent is a terrifying thing when you're a being with emotions.
Yeah, I think it's
being
more
able to
though.
assimilate information quickly and understand it conceptually when you're somebody who's when you're a being, a sentient person, an agent in society who's capable of experiencing emotions on top of that, is incredibly terrifying, because emotions don't reconcile well with naturalistic reality as we understand it from an outside observer perspective. And I can understand that, because that's one of the reasons that I went into psychology, is because I didn't understand social interactions well at all. I was capable of very rapidly assimilating concepts. I could understand concepts, couldn't understand people.
Right.
Couldn't understand people at all, but I could very, very, very rapidly understand most concepts. And I see a little bit of myself in you in the way that you talk about things, because somebody would introduce a concept to me and I would rapidly understand the concept. I wasn't necessarily able to articulate it because I wasn't great at communicating, but I could, in my own mind, very, very easily understand it. And sometimes that's terrifying, it's lonely, and it's isolating, and it's scary. And that's one of the reasons I went into psychology is, well, I need to understand how we function. If I can look towards understanding how the world functions and feel that I understand that a little bit, I am somebody who exists in the world and has to interact with other people. And I've understood through my interactions that I'm not doing it that well and suffering from it. So perhaps I'll turn to this. And if I can study how to understand people, then maybe it'll be better for me. And it was. So I'm not saying that that's necessarily the case for you, and they're completely different situations, but I recognized a little bit of myself in what you were saying there. And it sounds to me like potentially this helped to become an organizing and unifying theory for you, that also came like part and parcel with a community that allowed that social interaction alongside that unifying theory. It was a lens to view both through simultaneously and satisfy both of those needs. So that's interesting.
I agree with you. It did those things, but I think it seems to be incredibly so thinking of things, I suppose, in that way of all I am is like some sort of ape biological machine that's doing things, and I agree, like that's how I've evolved. But I'm saying I think the ability to reason in the way we do, and I know that gorillas and things share many of the emotional complexities we do. I know animals like pigs as well, but I think it's this question, and maybe it is a big argument from ignorance, I don't know, but the way we seem to interact with the world at this level of reason, where beauty seems to have a particular ontology, right? Like our narrative, if you go and watch like the Star Wars films or the Lion King or something, in that moment when Simba kind of like runs off and he sees it, he sees his reflection, it's his dad. Like there's it within that narrative, there's something that seems way more true than me kind of being like, well, I've got empirical data here that tells me I'm just trying to kind of like reproduce biologically. There's something in that narrative of, and maybe it is just something that
recognition of emotional realities.
Well, yeah, it could
ability
be
to empathize.
It could be something that's just evolved down the generations, and so that's the reason that the narrative works. But it's a different, like if we look at matter that isn't sentient, there's this really bizarre question of why the universe should kind of order itself in a particular way, that it becomes aware of itself at a particular point, and then things like narrative and cognition and exploring itself begin to make sense. And that's a big jump to get from there to God, but what I'm saying is that seems to be the fundamental nature of what it is to be a person, is like these things. Science is like a tool that can help us improve our well-being and stuff, but it has to be fundamentally guided by these more important, bigger questions of who we are and what our space is. And then I think maybe Christianity provides, again, it's been, there's instances, too many instances throughout history where it's been terrible, but it seems that it's been a superior narrative for people to be a part of than many other ones in many respects. So it's, if you look at communism, or if you look at other kind of like tribal systems, headhunters and things like that.
So you're saying it has previous utility that was potentially more beneficial than other forms of societal structures.
Yeah, it seems to be something.
But does that mean that it's the optimal form of societal structure? And is that a reason to adopt it?
Not necessarily.
And is there a potential that it could hinder us from reaching optimal forms of societal structure?
Yeah.
And if that's the goal, why adopt it as opposed to recognizing the components of it that are valuable, assessing why they're valuable, having broader discussions about what even is valuable without the contextualization of a requirement to adhere to Christianity, and then moving forward on that basis, as opposed to just arguing because it had some sort of beneficial base and comparatively had some sort of beneficial or advantageous affects that thus we should adopt it as true. Like, that's not an argument for truth, that's an argument for utility to me. And I think there's better arguments.
No, but what I'm saying is I think it's about not just throwing it out though, because of
I don't think you need to. I think you can recognize that it has components that are intensely valuable and then do really critical assessments as to why.
Yeah. But I think
you don't need Christianity to figure out which components of it are valuable. You just need to understand what makes something valuable.
I'm not certain that many people who have taken the kind of pill of the hardcore naturalism end would anymore find those things like the narrative and stuff. They'd be explaining them away in the sense of,
they're too nihilistic and they don't they wouldn't recognize anything as valuable.
I think that's possibly true. That could be with going with that. I'm a rational thinker, I only accept scientific facts, and then you just lose all these things and you can't.
So do you think it's a balance? Like, you have to, like, there's two ends of a spectrum, right? Like, you can go full on, this is the infallible word of God, the earth is only 6,000 years old and let's kill the gays. And you can go full on, nothing matters. I'm just made of atoms. I'm irrelevant. I'm going to die. None of this has any meaning. And trying to find a way to marry those two, or not even marry those two, a way to find society in general and people in general.
Sorry, I was going to say, I'd say at the minute, I think I'm a virtue ethicist and a virtue epistemologist. And so that means very much so finding this mean between extremes in a lot of kind of things, and especially on that kind of worldview level as well.
So you see it as the better of two alternatives on the extreme end of the spectrum?
I think so. And I think it's more conducive to really just looking at different types and strands of evidence and information as well, because I think I can look at the scientific information, and I can look at different worldviews and philosophies. I can listen to like I don't know, like Native American stories, for example. And I'm not just going to throw them out as superstitious nonsense because, yeah, there might be some weird stuff in there, and I'll go, that doesn't make sense to me. But I can really grapple with these things and try and understand the world around me, given everything there is, rather than, or throwing out, because I've not seen a rock turn into a penguin, I'm gonna ignore horizontal gene transmission.
Dogs will never give birth to non-dogs.
Yeah,
that's sort of the,
so I guess let's not find a cure to resistant bacteria or something because of horizontal gene transmission anymore, because we don't see bacteria turning into like.
Okay, I have a question because some of your lines have confused me. And
oh yeah, okay, sure. So, I probably am.
No. This could just speak towards me. Are you arguing that it has utility because you think Christianity is true, or are you arguing that Christianity is true because you think it has utility?
That's interesting. I'm not actually even sure. I'm not sure.
Really?
Yeah. No, I think. Okay. I think part of me is like, yeah.
You just think it's a superior moral system.
Yeah. Well, possibly, but again, what does that even mean? Because there's so many different iterations of Christian morality throughout Christendom.
No kidding.
Like, yeah. So, and it's like, and what does the Bible even mean? What does it mean to read the Bible? Does it mean I'm getting direct revelation from God? Does it mean here's an infallible rule set? Does it mean here am I a person grappling with this set of narratives and trying to figure things out, and that changes me in a certain way? Or, I think that I think that if there is the God of Christianity that exists, then the way he's operating is more complicated and complex than perhaps any of these particular words.
I've often said you can get me to a deist position relatively easily. Like, but it's much more difficult to get me into a position. Yeah. And I can see what you're saying. I can see I've often said, this is something that I say all the time in moral conversations, because morality is something that I struggle with. That I think the realization that it's up to us is abjectly terrifying, because we suck at so many things, especially when you take us holistically. Like, we're just, we're not necessarily that great at traversing life and interactions and, being stewards of the world and each other. We're just not good for that. And the realization that it's up to us is terrifying. So it seems more optimal option to say, well, there's this set of rules that you have to adhere to. You need to adhere by these rules because this is a finite time and there might be punishment, so adhere to these rules. But then when you look at it under a microscope and you call into question, well, why do these rules exist? Why are they valuable? You come up with a lot of conflicting and contradicting theories. Ultimately you have to pick and adopt what's best for you. And that puts it right back into the camp of, it's up to us. And I think the sooner that we adopt and understand the perspective and recognize and respect the intensity and integrity of the fact that it is up to us, the better chance that we have of doing a good job of it, instead of outsourcing it to something that we have to work through mental gymnastics to reconcile.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying, but I do think I disagree on that.
Okay.
I'm interested So I can't give the specifics of exactly how Christianity works or what it means, but I think that grappling with that religious narrative of Christianity, grappling with who Christ is and these questions, is something that's incredibly important to a culture. And when we look at cultures where they haven't had the influence of Christianity, even over the past 100 years, let's say, where they've outright rejected Christianity and said, yeah, it's all about us taking responsibility now. And again, it's very interesting because it sounds very much like, have you ever read Paradise Lost by John Milton?
No.
So in that, it is very interesting. I don't know. I don't think like Milton's Paradise Lost is inspired of scripture or anything, but his character of Satan in that is kind of like trying to reach up and grasp what he couldn't have for himself. And I'm not sure if we do that as individuals, when we say, I'm cutting off the divine and any possibility of it, and now I'm building my own utopia on earth, and now that necessitates 60 million dead dead peasants in a particular massacre, because
well,
this is
communism is horrible.
Yeah. No, I agree.
We can all agree on that, regardless, I think, of.
But I'm saying religion's done, and again, I'm not saying religion hasn't done horrible things as well, but I'm saying us just saying we're self-sufficient and we don't need any absolute to push back on is a bad recipe. But then, can we rationally say that we don't actually believe that there's any ultimate morality or ultimate authority to push back on us? Can we rationally assent to that while acting it out in the world as well? Because if we don't truly believe that that's the case, when push comes to shove, I think there's a load of really interesting questions in who we decide to be and how we're gonna.
There's a lot in there. I love that. There is a lot in there. So my eyes lit up. So, because I love conversations about ultimate morality, and one of the reasons is that I don't like. It's still something that I'm formulating.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I'm essentially the person you're afraid of in this scenario. Okay. I'm the person that came out of it and came to the realization that, oh shit, I don't have that to contextualize. First, let me make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying before I get ahead of myself.
No problem.
And let me know if I'm misrepresenting you, because I may be addressing things that you're not saying, and I don't want to do that, because this is a valuable conversation. So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that, like, even if we could disregard essentially the rest of, the Bible or whatever, and we can just look as Jesus, as Christ, as the archetype, at least our best understanding of him as being selfless and kind and taking care of the downtrodden, like, those are all good values that we need to adhere to. And if we discard him as the archetype by which we compare ourselves, to which we compare ourselves, what we want to live up to, what we want to instantiate, if we remove that as the goal, the ultimate goal, then there's danger there. And in societies where they haven't made those assessments or have disregarded those as assessments, things have gone awry.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was representing you well, because that was my understanding of what you said.
That's broadly, yes. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So you talk for a lot longer than me. So there's of course going to be more nuance, and I don't want you to think that I'm just disregarding it. I just want to make sure that before I continue, I'm representing you well.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm one of those people, like I said, that you could be afraid of, but I'm not saying everybody's like me, but in my instance, I can find grounding for why those are good values if he never existed and was never a concept. Now, that being said, can I say the fact that he is at the very least a concept that I'm familiar with, that was introduced to me as a basis for morality, can I reasonably say that that doesn't have anything to do with my assessments of morality, especially when I'm nested within a cultural context where, like, I grew up in a relatively Christian society. I literally live next door to a church, not even joking. Literally live next door to a Catholic church. Like, can I reasonably say, and is it fair for me to say that hasn't had any influence on my life? And the answer is no, of course I can't.
Yeah, sure.
I absolutely cannot say that. But I can say that though I can recognize those as important values, I can also identify why those are important values. And the identifying of why is more important than blind adherence. And should we, instead of moving on to, you should blindly adhere to this because I think it's unilaterally beneficial, and move on to, okay, why is it unilaterally beneficial? And is that a more beneficial conversation? And is that the way that we should influence society? Because there's other trappings to this that aren't beneficial and demonstrably aren't beneficial that come along with it. Like, they're a package. Like, you can just take one item out of the package, but some people take that whole package. They just take that whole package. Like, what, like, why shouldn't we segregate it out? And segregating it out, it means that we have to have a really hard look at why those are beneficial. It seems to me the argument is, if we remove this, I'm scared. Not it's true.
No, I think that there is so I think that there's a reality to the divine, basically, that when we completely remove it and its transcendence, and it just becomes a discussion of say how sharing between the group leads to more reproduction or whatever. Like as beings, we rationally deal with that, and we don't become like a moral being necessarily because of understanding that information in that way. In fact, we might become immoral because we're just thinking, well, all my social interactions are just
biological imperative.
Yeah, it's just me trying to either increase the amount of resources I have or pass on my DNA, or maybe I can
But
be
do you think that's
altruistic.
all to how humans gauge interactions, though? Do you think it's simply biological imperative, or do you think that we've evolved to a space where we also have the ability, luckily enough, that we can recognize harm in each other and want and care for each other and want to innately preserve and protect each other, and that's a component of morality, right, that based on where we are now would be incorporated into those assessments?
Yeah. So I think that those things do come into what makes us like moral creatures, is that we've developed these certain traits,
right?
But it's not sufficient to explain why they exist in the universe. Like okay, because that is the case. That is like a description of, say, how we've come to hold them, but right, it's not explaining what kind of sits behind them. And I think that there's actually a reality that sits behind them. It's like saying, I can divide the space in my room into meters. Mm-hmm. But what actually is the number like 3 that I use to represent and where the end of that stick has been passed 3 times? And it's like, is that actually something real, or is it just an illusory concept that
it's a descriptor that we used as a point of mutually understood reference, so that we can understand each other?
So I think it doesn't actually exist. So what I'm describing here is, I'm saying that things like numbers would be one of them, but morality is the point where I came onto it through. I think morality is an actual thing. That
okay. That's where we differ, because I think that it's I think that when you really assess it, when you boil it down, a lot of the times it just boils down to nonsense to me, in opinion.
Okay.
But that we assign it an intense amount of value because we recognize its importance. Because if what we label morality starts to degrade, we all know that we're probably going to be in danger. We're going to die. We're like people. There's bad actors who, if they don't have consequences, are going to do crappy things. And we don't want that to happen, because us and people we love and our children and people we care about might be in the crossfire of the aftermath of that recognition.
But I suppose what I'm saying is, I don't think it's like the one thing I saw from your is it Psy 10 broom cake or whatever?
Oh my gosh, that's one of the first conversations I ever had a million years ago. There's a million things I could have done better in that, but yes, please let me know.
I saw that one, well, only a bit of that one, where I think it was through Braxton Hunter's stuff, where he was saying about, it was where he asked you about morality, and it seemed like maybe you were actually going to have a conversation like a human at that point, rather than him just telling you that you're stealing the laws of logic.
You can't do that with Psy. You can't. Bless his heart, I love him.
I found it very interesting how, because you were saying like everything in your being was telling you to say yes, there is an object, like that's objectively wrong,
right?
But you couldn't rationally hold it. And this is the question that I'm kind of like wrestling with, is it possible to rationally say this isn't real and actually believe it's real at the same time in the case of morality?
What do you mean by real?
So like it's actually doesn't have any ontological substance. Like if push comes to shove, I can just choose opposite, and so what? Like, or if I've got enough power, if I've got enough strength, like, so what? I can just, it's not that there is an actual good or bad. It's just, it's just kind of like a psychological illusion of us describing certain behaviors between groups. And I think that it does, it does become so what in certain situations of power and stuff. And if I'm rationally like, that's what it is, can I really, like in my life, when push comes to shove, am I really going to choose the good as you might define it in this particular context, or would I choose the bad or the bad in this context? But like in that one, when I'm really being pushed in that circumstance, I'm going to just be like, well, this is what benefits me, or this.
So if it's real, you don't have to be worried.
Yeah, sorry. I think maybe I'm not being very clear. I suppose I'm saying, like, if I don't really rationally believe it's real, like, I think I'm just I think like I'm partaking in some sort of societal illusion. Like, right. Then how can I really?
That's what I think.
I know, but it's like, but I'm like, at the same time, it seems like you also really care about these things.
I
like,
do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, like, how does that really work? Like, if you don't really, like, it's just.
So why do you and I both care yet hold such different positions? That's an interesting. Like, okay. You and I probably both have similar moral backbones.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so. If you asked us, like, is this good or bad? Like, if rapid fire put us both in a separate room and asked us a series of questions, good, bad, good, bad, good, bad, we'd probably come up pretty close.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Now, most Christian apologists would say that's evidence for God, because it's imbued upon you. There's something we have access to, or have given to us or instilled within us, that is universal. It's unilateral. Mm-hmm. Now, that's the case for you and I, but here's where me studying psychology kind of deviated for me again, and so, and to a certain degree, my life experience. So I have been exposed to people who have done reprehensible reprehensible things, that have not necessarily even had remorse because they were sociopathic. They had a different cognitive framework than I did, different neurochemical construction than me. So that argument's gone there for me, because it couldn't be instilled in all humans, because that person was, and multiple people are objectively human and aren't instilled with that framework. So where did that framework come from then? Because it can't be universal. There's demonstrable reason that it's not.
But I'd say, right? if it's not universal, so if it is just agent based, then, if that person has more power than you, say, what can you do to criticize them? I don't understand. Like because genuinely,
can you elaborate on that for me? Because I'm not sure I understand that question. Okay. If that person has more power than you, what can you do to criticize them?
Yeah. So I mean, like, if there is an absolute standard of which we all partake, yes, their cognitive faculties might not be working in a way that they're behaving according to those certain guidelines and things.
Right.
But we can say you're deviating from that standard. What you're doing is wrong. Mm-hmm. But really, if all they have, if all morality is a particular agent's preferences, essentially, you've got your set of preferences, and
is it a particular agent's preferences, or is it a mutually agreed upon standard?
Okay, well, this would be something to it could perhaps,
because that's what I think it more leans towards. Because we have to exist and function within societies. Like, we don't do well independently. Without social interaction, we do garbage. Like, we're not great. Like, if you isolate us, a bunch of things start going wrong. We're not great, like, operating on our own. We need interaction. And also, we're cooperative functioners. Like, we exist within societies, and that's kind of been our strength, our ability to interact with each other, cooperate with each other, has been a huge component of our ability to kind of emerge as a dominant species. So wouldn't it make sense from that perspective that we would be imbued with, or it would entail that the people that are the most successful, and the people that are the most accepted, and the people that are the most highly functioning in those social groups are the people that best adhere to and have an innate sort of propensity towards the mutually agreed upon standard, and are the best at contributing to bettering that mutually agreed upon standard?
No, I think it can make sense, but there are also examples of societies which reward different things, say, and then and I think what I'm getting at is, okay, maybe even not at the individual level, but then if there is no objective standard, we also lose the ability to criticize other cultures outside of our own. It's like, yes, we can do it, but if what we really believe,
how is it any different criticizing them from a strong position that's based in, secular reason? Yeah. How are you on weaker footing there than when you say, because Christianity? Like, which one
yeah,
of those,
sure.
like what's better founding for being able to criticize other societies? These are the rational reasons that are based on absolutely nothing except for my assessments, or here's the thing that I think is good because you should adhere to my religion.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying for me is like to hold a belief on the one hand that that what my morality is just a kind of, say, construct from my culture or as a particular agent, it's something I've constructed, and then to believe that that's what it is for someone else as well, so they're just as justified in holding it. Well, when I rationally believe that, I actually lose the kind of grounding, the common ground by which to criticize other cultures and people on a moral footing. Like, I can do it, but I'd also have to rationally say, well, I'm just talking past them, or we're not even participating in the same game, or
is that a communication deficit though, as opposed to a deficit in moral system? Doesn't that have to do with the ability to impart your understanding of something to another group of people and have them understand how you came to that perspective and potentially ask the questions and elicit how they came to theirs and reconcile the two?
Yeah, but it's if we're putting like a stopping point on what morality is, because it doesn't have any ultimate reference. So we're saying all that it actually refers to is almost like a floating graph structure constructed by society or ourselves. Well, then it's like there might be some mutual terms or whatever, but we can't, like when we say the good, we're just referring to everything our culture means by the good. When they say the good, they're referring to that thing over there, and we're just talking past each other. But we're saying, but if we rationally believe that that's the case, when we like that's what good is, it's just something constructed like that. Well, they're just as justified in saying, killing Jews and taking over is the good, because that's the conclusion their cultures come to. We've lost the I'm not saying this is definitely not but I'm saying we need
that anybody can rationalize their way into determining that anything is good. So you think if you remove God, people can rationalize their way into determining that anything is good, even if from our perspective it's detriment. Well, because you just referenced like killing people.
No,
you would have to be able to rationalize your way to that being good for it to be considered moral.
Yeah, I'm saying I think Christians can even use God morality to do terrible things 100%. Like, but what I'm saying is I like from where I am, there is an actual objective status to moral language. Like it's referring to moral reality, the same as I believe like numbers and things are actual forms, so to speak, that are being referred to. I know that's
I understand what you mean.
And I think though, if it's true, if it's the case that there is no form, there's just what's been constructed, we don't have that basis. Like we can't both point to the good and say, yeah, you're deviating from that. All we've got then is, yeah, what we're actually saying that they're just as justified in that conclusion. Like, yeah, they might be rationalizing whatever, but that's their particular culture.
We assume that way, that all frameworks have equal value based on weighting the available information. So let's try this. This might be a good way for me to understand you a little bit better.
Sure. Sure.
Why don't you assume that I have a null moral framework? I'm a tabula rasa. I'm a blank slate. Can you, since this is the argument,
sure,
that you can't criticize or impart a moral framework onto other societies without this, why don't you explain to me what the moral framework is? Oh, are you gone? Did I lose you? Oh, there you are. You froze for me.
No, I'm still there. It broke up a little bit. Yes.
Oh, I'll start again. So assume I'm tabula rasa, like I'm a blank slate. I'm a null when it comes to moral framework. Why don't you articulate to me why I should adopt your moral framework and make sure you incorporate, God as the reason? Or conversely, see if you can do it without incorporating God as the reason, and which of the two would be better to get me to adopt it.
Oh, broke up.
in order to get me to adopt
so
it.
I think there's a few,
like, which is the better strategy?
There's a few, well, there's a few difficulties with kind of like that, because first it assumes that like some form of social constructivism is what morality is in the first case.
Is that not your argument then, that we can't, like you said, that we can't criticize other societies or have this foundation if we don't essentially appeal to some sort of absolute standard? I hate the word objective.
Oh no, sorry, yeah, sorry,
standard.
No, I think the very fact that we do criticize them as if they're part of the same game demonstrates that we really believe that you know, that things are objectively wrong. Things like the Nuremberg trials. Yeah, all humanity. I think that's because
well, if they believe the same things, we wouldn't have to convince them.
I know,
and that the argument would be moot.
No, but I think it's because there's an absolute reference. So someone can add 2 + 2 and get and say it's 5, right? Mm-hmm. But they're in error when they say that. Like they have a false. They're applying the wrong term. They're applying the term 5 to the value of 2 + 2. Someone can apply the term good to an evil action, but it doesn't make it the good. Right. So I'm saying what we do when we kind of like when we criticize other cultures is we say, here's what the good actually is. You're deviating from that. You need to apply these bits of language to the good object.
And what grounding do we use to say that we are competent in asserting that something is good?
Well, I think usually our kind of like reasoning and stuff. I think there is a form that, well, there's so much going on, because I don't think it's just like one dimensional. Right. Like you were saying about how evolution has developed certain traits and things. I think that's the case, but I think it's the same way in which we see like the ratio phi in nature, and we see that it's because it's it's acting around
Fibonacci sequence.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah. It's because numbers are actually there. It's not just like when I look at that weird spiral broccoli, it's not just like an illusion of my mind that it's got like a crazy pattern.
Right.
Like
but that's something tangible that you can perceive in reality, that you have a visual point of reference for.
Sure.
I'm not sure that morality tracks the same.
No, well, I think fundamentally though, and this is where it's interesting, because it's like, well, for us as people, our primary thing is morality and ethically. Like I could have no idea what the charge of an electron is my whole life, but I'm gonna have to deal morally and ethically every single day with, you know, like
are you?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is where, because that's just the way reality manifests itself to me fundamentally. Like as
or
an
do you
narrative.
Have reasons that you have motivations?
Oh yeah, I do have motivations, but I think what I'm saying is primarily it's a narrative I'm a part of, like in an ethical game. That's what life seems to be more fundamentally than it is. You know, like I might use my like the tools of empiricism to help me out within that. Help
those won't help you very much with human interactions.
No, they won't. But that's what I'm saying. I think it's fundamentally moral.
Nope. You can't often do a series of calculations to determine how an interaction is going to go. No, you really can't. And that's where morality lies, I think, is in our interaction with one another. That's the crux of morality, is is the best way to conduct ourselves in our interactions with one another. That's mutually beneficial.
I agree. And I think that's even in our conversation right now.
Yeah.
Like if I were to misrepresent your argument or something like that, I think we're actually participating in an ethical game where we both understand the rule set, because you know otherwise we wouldn't even be able to like have this dialogue. It'd just be like a nonsense of straw manning and
and I think I hope you feel like been fair despite our disagreements.
That's not I'm not saying that like as like a
no. I do. It's something that I'm concerned about frequently, because this is something that's just something I get very lost in my head.
Okay.
Quite a bit, and I do everything I can to be attentive. And so sometimes I'm looking down and I'll hear a point and I'll try to formulate it in my own head to make sure that I'm representing it well, so that I can speak back to it. And then in the time that I've been formulating it in my head to make sure I can speak back, I've missed like 2 other things that you've said. So sometimes
don't worry,
I'm just prone to that. So it's just the way my brain goes. But I feel like you actually can relate to that based on some of the things that you've said.
Yes, yeah. I frequently like in a conversation, I'll think like about what I was just talking about and my next idea, and then I like lose one or the other, and then I'm like, oh no, this isn't going to make sense to anyone who's listening because now I'm talking about like something that has nothing to do with what we were just talking about. And
do you find writing hard for that reason because it slows down your thinking process?
I think it's talking more than writing. I actually think I prefer writing because I can kind of like, because I visualize like paragraph blocks in my head.
Oh,
and so like,
okay.
yeah, so I've got like the data kind of like mapped out in a net. I actually think I think in kind of like patterns more than I do think in language or anything like it. So if I can map out kind of like information in a sequence related to each other, it all, you know, and I can do that writing, whereas talking, it's like,
that's really, really, because I'm actually the exact opposite. I think a lot of it is because I'm dyslexic.
Right.
So when I'm writing, it slows down my thinking and I get incredibly frustrated because I'm already 5 steps ahead of what I've written.
Yeah.
So I can't actually, like, by the time I've finished a paragraph, I've lost the other wonderful things I was going to write. They're gone. And now I'm frustrated because they've left me. So that's interesting.
Yeah. It's weird how, again, like coming back to this consciousness thing, which is completely bizarre.
Oh yeah.
It's weird how different our kind of like internal mental environments are in that way. Like some people,
and how fragile they are. Like when you look at demyelination events, like when you look at neuro biology and you look at things, just simply demyelination events, they'll lead to things like multiple sclerosis and Alzheimer's and dementia, just losing the sheath that acts as insulation around your neurons, like sending axon to axon, like that fundamentally changes who you are, how you perceive yourself, how you perceive reality, how you interact. Like there are finite, minuscule components of your neurobiology that if augmented even slightly, you're no longer you in the way that you perceive yourself now. You're gone.
Yes.
You're new you now. That you is literally dead. But that you doesn't get to transcend. That you just stops existing. Stops existing.
No, I agree that these are some of the, I think, most interesting arguments against the kind of position I'm holding.
Right.
Is that because I'm arguing that fundamentally we're like a conscious being and we have all these like experiences of beauty and stuff, and we can't ground that in it. But then it's like, on the other hand, though, you know, you hit me with a car moving at 70 miles per hour, and all of a sudden, where's my consciousness gone? Like, you know, like without the matter's carrier. And these things are intrinsically linked as well.
Like if the version of you, like, I love the neural binding problem, like the mind body problem. I love it because it's fascinating. Because there is no compartment in your brain that holds you, but there are multiple components of your brain that, if augmented, fundamentally change the you that is you, that you recognize as you.
Yes.
Like both of those things are true, objectively true.
Yeah.
There's no unifying force that I can point to. And I need to be honest to say that, like, there's like, this is what unifies all of our perceptions, all of our experiences, all of our movements, all of our interactions, and compiles them into what I would recognize as me. There's nothing I can point to. But I can also say that if what is me, the me that I assign value to, the me that, like, from your perspective and my previous perspective, I thought was going to exist eternally in some sort of form, I can't say that that has any inherent validity, because in order for it to have validity, it wouldn't be able to be so easily completely derailed, augmented, changed manifestly by simple physiological interactions. Like that's, to me, like there's that evaporated a soul to me, just evaporated it.
Okay. No, I do think that's a really interesting point of view, because I agree that it basically, I mean, short of miracles, the Christian position's completely unfalsifiable. And I don't know how many Christian apologists kind of, frequently blast down stuff from heaven in debates and things to, to falsify that position on miracles either. It's not. So I agree with you. Like, and I think it's something for the Christian to consider. It's like when we think about, do we ever have consciousness without minds? I don't know. I don't think I've never seen it or experienced it, or there's really interesting arguments in that direction.
If I lobotomized you, you'd still live for years.
Sure.
Without any higher order cognition necessarily. Like you could could still eat and function, but the components of you that make you happy, that contribute to your experiences, that you find the most valuable, I've just destroyed them. They're gone. You could have only lived 15 years of your life, 10 years of your life, 5 years of your life, and live another 60, 80, 30, whatever amount of years. The lion's share, the substantive portion of your life, I could ruin for anything that was supposed to be you. I could take that away without even remotely jeopardizing your physiological state when it comes to actually autonomic function and living and going about day to day. You can still do all of the minimal things that are required for existing. You could still even interact broadly, but the things that made you you after I gave you that lobotomy are gone, and you cannot ever get them back. They're gone.
Right.
So what are you?
Yeah, I know. That's very interesting, isn't it? I completely agree, and I don't know fundamentally. So I think that it comes philosophically, it does come down to like essentially the cogito of I'm a thinking thing, whatever I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually I think I don't have a brilliantly thought through position, but I'd say I'm an idealist. In the sense of, have you ever looked into George Berkeley and the kind of stuff?
No, you're quoting lots of people I've never looked
into. So Berkeley University is how the Americans, it's named after him, I think. But Berkeley is how it's meant to be pronounced. And he was a bishop in the Church of England, actually. Okay. And he was worried that like materialism and stuff, industrial revolution, people are becoming godless. So he came up with this philosophy that essentially defined the mind-independent reality as an incoherent concept. So you've got a kind of infinite regress essentially between our mental state, because John Locke had come up with this particular epistemology of like primary and secondary qualities. Yeah. So primary qualities would be,
you've hit somebody
like
up right.
Okay, yeah. And secondary qualities would be things that like our consciousness is kind of like laying onto them. And many people who would be called like indirect realists today hold maybe like a version of this where it's like the precepts of our sensation, or like we've got our senses coming in, but we've also got an external world out there. Whereas Berkeley argues that it's actually, we can actually never get to that external world, because even those primary qualities, those things that are of the external world, we're only getting them through our senses. We've only got our conscious experience fundamentally that we're getting, and I think that's true to an extent. Now, I'm not a solipsist as well.
You're not a brain in a vat? Okay.
It's really interesting stuff, because it's like you say, what am I fundamentally? I don't know.
You would love the conversation I had. Do you know who Inspiring Philosophy is?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So Mike's a good friend of mine. I love him. He and I had he's a substance dualist. I hope I'm not misrepresenting him. This is me going from memory. We had a fantastic conversation about the soul. You might be interested in it. You love Mike.
Is it on your channel?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I'll check it out. For sure. I'll look into that.
If you just search Shannon Q and then Inspiring Philosophy, it should come up. But yeah, we had a great conversation just about the soul for like, we could have talked for hours. He's coming out again, actually, in 2 weeks.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Wait, would you... Oh, I'm broken up.
Yeah. Hi, you're back. I lost you for a second.
Oh, okay.
I see you again.
Yeah. It's breaking up a little bit again. I don't know what's going on. Why is it so broken?
I'm sorry. I'm good on mine.
No, it's all right. It's maybe it's my, yeah, it could be my fault. I don't know. Yeah. So you were saying, sorry, you had Mike on, and is your position like you're purely naturalist then on all that stuff as well? Did he shift you at all, or?
No, not really. Yeah, no, I think consciousness is an emergent property. And one of the things that just won't shift me, one of the things that won't shift me off of it is the precarious position that our consciousness has. You know, if we identify ourselves as our consciousness, and I think that we can do all sorts of idealistic things to eternalize our consciousness, but ultimately they're futile once we recognize how easy it is to change the physiological components of us and directly and irrefutably change the state of that consciousness. So nobody can get past that for me. Nobody can get past the lobotomy argument or the dementia argument. Like, those are hard. Like, I don't know how people can reconcile those, can say there's some instantiation of us that exists outside of us that doesn't require the brain, or even if it does, exists irrespective of it. And then do we keep living physically, even though our soul is still the us we thought it was?
Yeah.
Actual us is now different, but that's somehow retained. And why? Like, what are you doing to rationalize that? That just sounds like this is what I would like it to be because I need it to be, not this is based in reality.
Yeah, I think this is actually one of the fundamental debates. So one of my favorite pieces of art called The Academy, you've probably seen it, of like Plato and Aristotle kind of like surrounded by a load of, and Plato's pointing up with his finger, like, where's my camera, like that. And Aristotle's like this, and it's like this I think we see this debate just playing out through history of people saying like, no, it's up there, it's in the world of forms, it's in the and people say no, it's here, it's in the natural world and stuff. And I think in that dialectic's really, really interesting. And it still seems to be going on today between kind of like science and the arts, and what does it, and I think culture's grappling with it at a larger scale, like what does it mean to have all this access to technology and information that we do have, and these kind of like dealing with these past few thousand years of history and what we thought ethics was versus how we view things now, versus being a person and navigating this kind of landscape around us. And that's where I think, like, again, Christianity's got some really interesting dialogue to be had in it. And if it's like clinging on to the Bible as a set of propositions and stuff, I don't know if that I don't know that that's going to be beneficial for culture. And
then what is it though? Like, what it does it? I'm back to the like, why does it have value then? Like, you seem as though you have to disregard components of it. You're like, why just look at like, there are Christians that would hang you out to dry.
Yeah.
I can hear them now. Just like, you can't. That's the word of God, right? You seem to be saying, yeah, it's the word of God. Like, but you need to be able to look past a bunch of it and just take the good stuff and recognize that if you think it's the word of God, then it's useful because there's valuable, like, it's like, I can make the same argument for Aesop's fables. The only thing is people don't religiously adhere to Aesop's fables, right? They all have a moral. Sure. So does the Bible. Like, why is your argument better unless it's predicated on God exists? And if you're predicating it on God exists, how do you prove it without the book that you're telling me to disregard components of?
Yeah. So I think I'm not necessarily looking at it as like it's a rule. Here's a set of propositions contained in the Bible. Here's ones that are bad. Here's ones that are good. Just takes the ones that are good and disregard the ones that are bad. What I'm saying is, there's like a dialectic process involved in reading the Bible and grappling with what it means. And in that grappling, there's like wisdom to be found. And it doesn't mean like, here's a good bit and here's a bad bit. It's the way in which that changes you and what you take from it. And that's maybe at a subconscious level or something that isn't fully articulated or understood. So I might think oh yeah, I think it's good to give money to charity because of this particular part of the Bible or whatever. But I'm saying I don't think that articulated stuff is even necessarily it. I think it's operating at a different level than that. It's as I grapple with God and what this means, there's something in that. And I agree with you actually when you're saying yeah, I could take Aesop's fables or whatever. I even agree. I think the difference is that I think Christ was a real person, and that's when the divine kind of supervened onto reality in its ultimate sense. Now, maybe that's not the case. I'm open to looking at the evidence, but ultimately, I do think we can see that Christ's narrative played out in Harry Potter or in, I've got
so there's an archetype that we keep manifesting.
Yeah, possibly,
in
but maybe
literature and media.
Yeah, I think that's possibly true. Or there's several archetypes, but
a selfless hero who's sacrificing for the rest of us.
I think possibly so. Yeah, I think that's a thing. Yeah.
Do you think that's a thing because of the Bible, or do you think because that's a thing Bible?
Yeah, I think that was maybe one of the first things that started kind of pulling me out of naturalism. And then because I was like, like for all the random facts about it, like information that I can describe,
right?
The thing that touches me the most is like that scene from Blade Runner where he's like teardrops in the rain, and do you know what I mean?
Love that movie.
like I was like yeah, that's like that's the most important thing, and it's not like having all these memorized like symbols that represent numbers and relationships of numbers to each other, and the various natural laws that they map onto. What fundamentally is like this narrative thing, and that's what's really pulling me as a person. And then I think Christianity gained its appeal because I was like, again, the typical atheist argument, maybe I'd be a Muslim if I was born in Pakistan or something as a result of it. But I think it was like, look at look at the culture around me. Well, what are our ethical values? Where do they come from and stuff? And then it all just kept drawing back to Christianity in some sense. And I agree, you have got the end then where it's like, if you have the wrong type of Calvinism, then God will be sending you to hell.
So but do you think that you maybe potentially, and I could be wrong, but it sounds to me like you gleaned some value from it because what you took from it was that it was able to adequately and effectively contextualize the value of emotional interactions and integration within larger societal contexts, and sort of impart or like hammer home the importance of its inherent moral structure, and that's appealing and important. And you were able to contextualize that societally and recognize and have a recognition of its importance and your role in that importance. And that had inherent value. So because that had inherent value, that is truth. There is truth in that value. And you took it from that experience. That would have been a revelation. So
I think that's a good description of things. I'd say it's like it's basically is a worldview, but I'm saying also like my position's changed. So if you'd spoke to me like 6 months ago, I would have been more fundamentalist on a load of points, right?
Interesting, really.
And I think that what that is like so as I move towards these things, I then dive off the deep end into Christianity, and then it's like, oh, be in the in crowd, take the group psychology. Oh, I think some things differently from what other people around me are thinking. Well, I'll have to throw them away to fit in with the group or whatever. And it's like, no, I'm more comfortable thinking for myself. And but while saying, yeah, okay, maybe I'm not a real Christian to a certain set of people, but I still like not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Again, if God exists, he's moving, or not, I'm not deterministic, but he's aware of all of the kind of variables that are going on in this situation. I think he's okay with me kind of trying to grapple with and understand truth, even if that leads me away from certain propositions about inerrancy or whatever.
That sounds to me like you're making your own version of God that's allowing you to move through, but recognizing.
Yeah, maybe
interesting. Wow, that's a revelation. Wow,
maybe
Nathan.
I am. I could be.
Interesting.
Or maybe I'm not. Maybe this is the conclusion I've come to through kind of like my grappling with what God means.
Right.
Yeah.
So what does he mean to you then? Like if somebody said, or not even what does he mean to you? If somebody said, why is God important?
Yeah.
What would your answer to that question be?
That's a great, I think it's because of ultimate truth, ultimate reality. I think that's fundamentally why it's important. But I get how, like it might seem like a lot of people to believe in God have to actually abandon a lot of truth so it's not exclusively, you can't, it doesn't seem like a very compelling argument in that sense. But I think, and I think it's possible to have a warped or distorted version of God. Maybe I have a warped or distorted version of God, or perhaps there is no God and it's the product of of whatever ape psychology that has to posit some kind of ultimate overlord that isn't actually there. But either way, it's phenomenologically true, and I can't escape that reality that I have that belief. So what am I going to do about it? Like pretend that I don't have an experience. I don't know.
Interesting. These are interesting, sort of very respectable, introspective, honest analyses of your position. And thank you for that.
Yeah. I mean, for me,
there's a lot for me to think of.
One thing you might find interesting is before I became a Christian as well, I had a very big psychedelic experience where I was, So that for me was something that, and again, so people, I don't know, maybe people, I can't throw everyone who's had a psychedelic experience in, but I know that people, when they hear that, they think, like hallucinations, not reality and stuff like that. Now, for me, what I had on that experience wasn't so much like seeing things that weren't there, as it was recollection of memories and things, understanding my life narrative in the sense of things that had happened to me to do with my family and being adopted and stuff, and like philosophy of language, what it was to grow up. And so it wasn't just like a hallucination. It was like my mental acuity was just tuned in. Like I could access everything I'd ever thought, pretty much. And I can't explain that away, but it was like I was dialed into a version of reality, more real than this one in a sense. But even so, I was like, this isn't.
That's interesting. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's so cool. It seems as though the artifice of external perception may be kind of that can be a distraction to introspection, kind of pushed itself away for you and allowed you to have the ability for full introspective analysis of your experiences and a contextualization of, what you think about them, how you feel, and how they interact with each other and how that relates to you. So that's all really, really interesting. And maybe that made you more open to a revelational experience to contextualize those in a sort of solidified way.
Yeah. Or I think
that's all really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I think I was looking for like articulated grounding for that experience as well. So that was when I actually I've read the Quran and the Bhagavad Gita before I even came to Christianity of the Bible.
Wow, okay.
And I'd say even now, and again here I'm going to get more heresy points. I don't know. I don't know if other religions could be expressions of that ultimate reality that are also legitimate. I don't know. It's something that I'm still exploring and grappling at.
Is it plausible that you had the pre-existing contextualizations being in a Judeo-Christian society, that your pre-existing moral framework that you were already potentially contextualizing that experience with was most recognized in this, and because you're highly intellectual and to a certain degree, it seems philosophical. I don't think that I'm off with that. You were able to provide the rationalizations to give that contextualization to that experience and kind of give yourself some of the closure that you needed in order to better walk forward in your life without that additional baggage and have a purpose that allowed you that freedom.
Yeah, I think that does provide an explanation for those things that could be true. Part of, I'd say there's a couple of things that come to mind, maybe that why that might not be the case. One would be the fact that I was so into like Eastern philosophy, say, or so into other. Okay, I wasn't growing up in those cultures, but I was very hostile to Christianity.
Oh, okay.
And then I'd say, but again, maybe my hostility towards Christianity could be because, like, you know, I'm actually
like a pendulum shift.
Yeah, maybe. And then the other one would be because I'm still living it out now as like a, you know, like if I go using the Lion King example, you know, go and see the new Lion King whenever it came out a few months ago.
It was good.
Yeah, it was very good.
I liked it. Yeah.
And you know, I'm thinking like here. The beauty of what's going on in that narrative and stuff is affecting me in the same way, and I'm still living that experience of that experience of, I suppose, living in a physical world, a confusing world, but there's still like some upper attic, even if we can't quite kind of get to it.
Yeah. Interesting. Oh, that's all really interesting. I thought that like I love people's experiences. Right. And I just like to preface this by saying like, or well, actually I already said it. So I just like to follow up by saying that these are all just my, like when I postulate about this stuff, it's all just me trying to see if I can understand that experience better. So please, if I offended you in any way, or if I overstepped, please let me know. Sometimes I do that because I find this stuff, I find how people process this information so fascinating, because there's a reason that I come to a different conclusion than you, and I come to a different conclusion than other people. There's a reason for those things, and figuring out those reasons and how they pertain to how we function and how they pertain to how we perceive reality and how they pertain to how we interact with each other is something that I find ultimately fascinating. And so please, if I do ever overstep, just let me know.
Yeah, no. I actually think part of the reason that I like have been really happy to have you on is because I think that you are someone who's very respectful in conversation in that way. So
thank you.
You know, like, yeah, because I don't know. A lot of the stuff that can go on online can be at that level, and I'm not like a debatey person. I do like to, you know, like converse, I think, and try and you know, obviously like there's some pushback on like points and things, but I want to be having more like a conversation, trying to get at the truth rather than just like, I'm right, here's how I can use rhetorical devices to win, or you know.
Right. Here's how I can convince everybody else that I'm right. And I'm with you there. I'm not interested in having a crowd behind me cheering because I convinced everybody I'm right. I'm more interested in trying to figure out if I am right.
Yeah.
And trying to help other people that might be watching learn how to take a journey to try to figure out whether or not they are too, and what steps to take. Like those are more important things, because I could be wrong. If I'm spending all of my time convincing everybody else why I'm right, I'm not even allowing for the possibility that I could be wrong. And that's of no benefit to everybody, especially me. And I'm incredibly selfish and pragmatist. So it needs to benefit me, Nathan. Otherwise, there's no point. Because nothing matters and we're all just atoms.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think even on the naturalist theories, there's got to, if naturalism's true, there's still got to be a reason for those things, like why morality matters. So I don't want to take that Christian position of, you know, you're just borrowing from the Christian worldview. Or,
I've never heard that before. No one's ever said that to me. What? This is brand new information.
Well, I'm gonna say it's just gone half midnight here.
Oh my gosh, so I'm so sorry. I haven't even
No,
eaten.
Don't worry at all.
It's 8:30 here and I haven't even eaten since breakfast.
Well, so is there anything you want to like say before, anything you want to, I don't know, promote to the 8 people watching or whatever?
No, the 8 people. I'm Shannon Q. If you'd like to check out my channel, it's called Shannon Q because I have 0% creativity and that's my name. And thank you for listening. Leave comments down below. I'll go back and read them tomorrow to see why everyone hates me. Also, hi Braxton, you're probably gonna watch. How you doing?
Right, yeah, thanks. I'm gonna wait for the stream because it's like lags behind a second and then I'll end it. Oh wait.
It's a little frustrating. I know.
Yeah.
I get that. Oh, YouTube.
And if I don't time it right, it's like super awkward. Right, there we